Do you love books? Do you wish you could hear some insights straight from the author themselves? Join Sam Hankin, your host, as he interviews top-selling book authors and dives into interesting and unforgettable discussions here at the Avid Reader.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Avid Reader, brought to you by Wellington Square Bookshop. Our guest today is Gabe Henry. His book is Enough is Enough. You'll see the cover and see what that means. It's Enough is Enough. There it is. And it's kind of scrolling through the possibilities of what you can do with a language that's almost obnoxiously obstructive and ignorant, but here it is, and it hasn't really changed much. Anyway, he's the author of this, Enough is Enough, subtitle, Our Failed Attempts to Make English Easier to Spell, published by Day Street just about a month ago and change. Gabe is the author also of Eating, Sell It Drunk, Haikus for the Burnout Age by Comedy Greats, and his history, humor, this is kind of the same thing, compendium, What the Fact, 365 days, 365 strange days in history. His work has been published in the New York Magazine, New Yorker, lots of other places. So today we're delving into, I guess you could call it delightful, but maybe not the delightful chaos that is the English language. You know, it's so strange that I remember in elementary school when I realized what they were teaching us, that you could spell fish, Goti, G-H-O-T-I. I realized this is not something I necessarily really want to be involved in. And the other thing was, for me, I remember when I was even in kindergarten, I realized 4, 4, and 4, they sounded the same, but all three words meant something completely different. So it's a language that, essentially, unfortunately, keeps us on our toes every moment of every day, and generally leaves us scratching our heads for a lot of words that we say and write and see. And it's really good because Gabe gets into, from Benjamin Franklin to Lil Wayne and Prince, and I was thinking Haagen-Dazs, but he's thinking Blue Oyster Cult. Anyway, so hi Gabe, how you doing?
I'm great. Thanks for having me, Sam.
So you held up the book before. Let's talk about the cover.
Yeah. Should I hold it up again?
Yeah, because like I was saying, the cover of a book in my business, selling books, where people always do judge a book by its cover. The cover kind of is like the box, a jigsaw puzzle box, which we do sell, where you look at the cover and you go, oh, that's what's inside. And the cover kind of does that. So tell me, like you just told me a few minutes ago, about how the cover came about and why you chose the derivations of the spelling of enough to get to E-N-U-F.
Well, we wanted the cover to be without pictures. We wanted the words to indicate what's inside. As you said, we wanted it to be bold, colorful, but understated. But the back and forth we had between agent, publisher, editor, author took months and months of going back and forth in email exchanges about the colors, the font, the size. We even scrapped the entire idea of doing this succession of increasingly more chaotic spellings of enough. We even scrapped that idea and went for a brand new idea with a yellow cover and a bolder design. And then 2 weeks later, we scrapped that. I think we definitely found the ideal cover, but it took 2 months of concentrated debate amongst 6 people to figure it out. It's one of the rare instances where 6 people debating something over 2 months actually yields something really good.
Yeah, that's what I was saying, as a bookseller, when this is on the front table, well, actually, when I saw it, I had to stop and look at it, and I thought, wow, this really looks interesting. And so it's worth the time that you spent. Now, yeah, you vetted that, but then when I opened the book, and this is the other thing a bookseller does, is you always look at the epigraphs. And I have to say that these two people have never been combined in epigraphs. I'm 100% sure of that. So explain those.
I can read them out to start. So we have on the left side of the page, quote from Benjamin Franklin, "Those people spell best who do not know how to spell." And on the opposing page, we have, "Real G's move in silence like lasagna." Lil Wayne. So I hope that I hope that it's not the last time those two will be together in a book, but it's probably the first.
Yeah. It's like even Lil Wayne's name, the Lil, it's a perfect example. And you go into that in detail too. But
Hmm.
and also Lil Wayne's epigraph is incredibly poetic, isn't it?
It is. Um, you have to think about it for a bit. There's a lot packed into that. Real G's move in silence like lasagna. That's a even the it's poetic, and then that last word lasagna is, I think it invokes a cartoonish, comical feel. I think it's actually a good encapsulation of the whole book. I'm trying to do something serious and poetic, but also there's something silly, kind of chaotic and absurd about it at the same time.
Yeah, even saying G is goes back to rap and hip hop.
Yeah.
Um, well, I guess the best place to start is the start of the language because someone, actually, my stepdaughter said last night, "Well, who invented this?" And I said, "I can't really. It wasn't. First of all, it's not an invention." And then I yell at her. I shouldn't yell at her. So it's not an invention. It's an evolutionary process.
Mhm.
Who is the person? There wasn't one person, and she got mad at me too. There must have been one person who named this thing. So I guess the best way to start for me would be maybe with the Celts or the Celts and
Mhm.
how that began in the British Isles, and then move forward from that, and then we can intersperse some other questions about that.
Yeah, the first recorded language in England was Celt, and this was kind of a combination of different tribal languages, which we all fall under this umbrella of Celtic. Um, People were speaking this up until the Romans invaded, so for hundreds of years. And when the Romans invaded, the Romans came in, they spoke Latin. So Latin became the primary language of England, and all the people speaking Celtic went to the distant Isles, Wales, Ireland, Scotland. Celtic turned into Gaelic, it turned into Welsh, and it dispersed into the outer regions of England. So Latin for a few hundred years was the language of England. Then the Roman Empire fell. Then the Germans came in, these German tribes, the Angles and the Saxons. And those Germanic languages merged with Latin. They also kind of merged with Celtic, and they turned into what we know of as Old English. That lasted a few hundred years, and then the Vikings invaded over and over again. Basically, the history of England is one of constant invasion and conquest, and new each new conquest brought a new language, and all these languages merged and mingled over the centuries and turned into what we know of as English. So, um, you should tell your granddaughter. What is it? Your granddaughter?
Now, which pretty much
Yeah.
everyone thinks every young person is my grandchild. No, she's my stepdaughter.
Stepdaughter. You should tell her that. She wants a concise answer. You might have to explain it for about 5 minutes. I think that's as concise as you can get.
Yeah, the problem is in today's age, you have to explain what Celts are and you have to explain who the Vikings are because nobody.
Right. The Celts are who the Knicks beat in the Eastern Conference Championship.
Yeah, but it's the Celtics,
I know.
the Celtics.
Yeah.
It's like when I had my first, I practiced law for a long time. When I had my first hearing in this podunk place outside of Gainesville, Florida, the judge's name is Beauchamp. So I called him Judge Boucham. And
Hmm.
my name is Beecham.
No.
Yeah. Yeah,
Put your foot down.
I was really embarrassed. Um, yeah, so it's a mongrelized language, which mutts are good dogs. And talk about like when the Vikings came, so the people who were in the British Isles, they took words from the Vikings that we still use today, right?
Yeah. So the Vikings, we're talking about roughly um 800 AD or so. The Vikings came in, they were speaking a form of Norse, Scandinavian, and they had a lot of different grammatical, syntactical, and orthographic um, quirks that merged with Germanic, that merged with Latin, and we adopted a lot of words. They adopted some words. A lot of place names in England today, especially ones ending in Kirk, like Dunkirk, come from Scandinavian, come from the Vikings. They tend to be up north because that's where the Norse held land. So, I mean, looking at our language, looking at take a random sample sentence of our language, and you can see centuries of history in there. You can see um, these build-up layers through time, like sedimentary layers of this culture started, this culture conquered them. It's really beautiful in a way. It is obstructive to people trying to learn it, but taking a poetic stance, there's some beauty in the layers of English.
Yeah, when you said sedimentary, I thought of stratification, and it is stratification, but it blurs, you know?
Mhm.
It doesn't, it's not specific lines, which was what my stepdaughter was looking for, a line, and there isn't any. I, I
Yeah.
don't, but
Well, I think the closest you can get to a line is when William Caxton introduced the printing press. So I heard this described in a very photographic way the other day. So basically, for hundreds of years, England it's evolving this language, and it's ugly, and it's messy. And if you picture like a child going through puberty, they're being pumped full of all these hormones and changes. They're growing weird facial hair. They're starting to smell. Their hair is wild. They have acne on their face. And right there at the peak of your most awkward puberty day, you walk into school and you realize it's picture day. And that's William Caxton in the printing press. You take that photo, and that's the photo that lasts forever. And that's the photo. So that's England now. It wasn't allowed to grow out of its puberty. It's still kind of stuck in it.
it's interesting how, and we haven't mentioned it yet, how French entered it, and England for a while thought, wait, maybe this is better. Maybe we should just switch.
Yeah, in 1066, the French come in, the Norman French, who come from Normandy. They, for 300 years, England spoke primarily French. There was no king for 300 years who spoke English. And during this time, what happened was the upper tiers of society spoke only French, the noble classes, the royal class, and the lower classes continued to speak English. So England for a few hundred years became bilingual along class lines. The lower classes kept their English words, the upper classes their French words. And again, in this slow blurring of sedimentary layers and evolution in time, these merged and they mingled and they took on strange forms. So we have a lot of French words in our language today because of this. And a lot of our French words happen to concentrate around areas of upper class nobility, like our law system, our legal system. Um, and we describe monarchs as royals, which is a French word. And then you have English words that continue in more modern, more everyday, commonplace things like food and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, again, going back what you said about law, you go to Louisiana where they still follow the Napoleonic Code, the only state that does, and it's basically based on French, but also a good portion of what I learned in law school was helped me because I had taken Latin before.
Hmm.
From res ipsa loquitur to what Trump will probably suspend, habeas corpus, those meant specific things to me where people outside the law in all likelihood had no idea what they meant.
Right. And of course, we adopted a lot of these Latin words during the time of Constantine, when Christianity was coming into England, into the Western world. And a lot of Latin comes to us via French. Some French comes to us via Latin. Of course, French itself comes from Latin. So these the the Romance languages that pervade the legal system, that can be pinpointed to 2 or 3 eras of English history.
Yeah. Again, when I was a kid, the first thing I thought about why this was all screwed up completely was because I thought English was a combination of a Romance language and German.
Hmm.
What is both ugly and unwieldy. That's just the way I split it. I mean, it would seem simply like two things. If it was
You,
one or the other, it would be fine.
you're not wrong. We want to think of things as binary or as simple as possible. I think of English more as 8 languages in a trench coat.
Yeah. Well, that goes to, I guess, if we're moving along past that time, you know, and you make a point of this throughout the book, is there's all these people who realize what you and I are talking about, and they say, we have to change this, from Benjamin Franklin to Mark Twain, to C.S. Lewis, and they were also, like you say, they're also enthusiastic, and they thought losing letters, adding letters, using numbers instead of a set of letters, which is the way things are now, making symbols that were strange or repeating letters.
Mhm.
And they all were so happy about their ideas, but they all failed.
They all failed time and again. This book is kind of a history, it's a biography of failures. It's a biography of futility. And I mean, I'm the kind of person that finds that very comical. But yet, time and again, people come along, huge names, huge looming historical figures like Benjamin Franklin, like Mark Twain, even Charles Darwin, come to this subject of English spelling reform because they realize that English is harder to learn than most other languages. We've done studies in the modern day that shows that it takes English speakers 2 to 3 times longer to learn spelling than children in Spanish or German speaking countries. But on top of that, we also have twice the rate of dyslexia. Like there's some real world consequences to our messy language. And what these reformers believed was that the real moral failing is not that we can't spell, it's that we've built a language full of traps and then we've judged people for falling into them. So they thought, let's just fill up those holes. Let's just make it easier in a democratic way for as many people as possible. But again, it's hard to change a language overnight.
Yeah. I also thought about how, with the Scripps National Spelling Bee and the last like 20 winners being Indian,
Hmm.
have some perspective. You're outside of the language, and your own language contains names, uh, surnames, and first names that are 13 or 14 letters, at least phonetically. Somehow that makes it so much easier. And I could see if it was 5 in a row or 6 in a row, but it's 2 decades of
Hmm.
only Indian people winning the spelling bee. And you find that interesting?
I do find it interesting. I wonder if there is something about their language that linguistically helps them to memorize photographically or understand our language better, or if it's just a it's just part of their culture to compete in linguistics in this certain way. Once you've had three Indian winners in a row, there could be a feeling of identity surrounding spelling after that among younger kids. Maybe um, they see a role model in these winners. So at 5 years old, they start studying the dictionary. It could just be that it becomes part of their culture and that people from Indian heritage really want to keep this part of their culture by continuing to study it. I was at the spelling bee, it was a week ago,
Right.
in Washington, D.C., and I'd say maybe 7 out of the final 10 were Indian. I think it's incredible that it's become such a big thing, but that one culture seems to be dominating it is even more incredible to me.
I know I'm jumping around, but that made me think of something too. Have you ever seen the YouTube videos where they have French people trying to pronounce the word squirrel and no one can, because
No,
it's such a screwed up word? I wonder if that's based from a Native Indian word, Native
it
American.
sounds like it sounds like it would be. It sounds like it would be, and have words like tomahawk and canoe and bluff referring to a cliff. I think squirrel would be in there, especially because I think squirrels were an animal that the mainland Europe didn't really know until they started colonizing.
There's so many sounds in there that are generally interpreted differently, because
Yeah.
If someone who's French hasn't learned English very well, you see Squirrel. They just can't put it together because it makes absolutely no sense at all.
If I never heard the word before, I'd say squirrel. I'd say squirrel. Um, but we have, yeah, I think the two vowels that we say, squirrel, they're not usually associated with those letters there.
No, and it's funny watching them because they are embarrassed and they can't do it. They stop people on the street. Um, so we're talking about the individuals who tried to make a difference. You know, even the Mormons. Oh, I know what you do. You 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 put out in several pages of the book. You do the Lord's Prayer
Hmm.
in different interpretations of these people who attempted to change things. And some
Hmm.
of them I can kind of read. Some of them are totally impossible to even decipher.
Many of these reformers, for whatever reason, I think it was just coincidence, once they once they had their system of spelling, they had to demonstrate it, and they would do translations, often of biblical texts. And many of these reformers relied on the Lord's Prayer, probably because it's well known and it's also 15, 20 lines, so they could fit it. So you can actually line up all these translations of the Lord's Prayer and see the evolution of these reformers and see their ideas in real time. And some of them, like you said, are relatively easy to parse, and then some of them have are packed with numbers and upside down letters and weird, strange symbols that you really couldn't read unless you were really fluent in their system.
You talk about the guy, I've forgotten his name, who believed that musical notation could easily translate into the English language, which kind of led to shorthand, which I'm
Hmm.
also fascinated with because my mother was really good at shorthand. And I looked at what
Hmm.
he was writing. I had no idea what anything said.
Yeah, Isaac Pittman. He's the creator of Pittman shorthand, which is over the past century and a half the most prominent popular form of shorthand for secretaries, stenographers, journalists. In the 20th century, another shorthand called Gregg shorthand became popular, but Pittman really was the prototype. And this came from Isaac Pittman, who had this history, this childhood rooted in music. He always associated music and books. He was trained in several instruments, and he believed that the same way that musical notation can capture nuances and rhythms and tempo and harmony and sound. He believed that the same way it can do that, it can do the same for language. So he came up with his first version of Pittman shorthand, which he called soundhand, stenographic soundhand. So he didn't have a staff in the way musical notation does, but he did have little articulation marks on the tops of his symbols. And depending on where it was, up or down in the line, to the left or the right, or if it was on its side, it would indicate a different notation of spoken sound rather than musical sound.
Yeah, which reminds me, all of this is very, and one of the good things about the book is that I always say this when you close the covers, if you just keep thinking about it. And generally, you read a novel, you close the cover, that's the end of it. But in a book like this, you keep thinking and either go down the rabbit hole with other books or other works, or just keep thinking in your mind. And then anytime you see a word that's kind of funky, you go, oh, yeah, and that makes no sense, which normally you would just gloss over. But then I was thinking of like hieroglyphics and a lot of Asian languages, which are just lines that used to represent an object.
Mhm.
But
Yeah, these are pictographic languages. Um, and and the one of the issues that some of the early reformers were worried about with English, someone like Benjamin Franklin, he was worried that our language, which is an alphabetic system, was evolving toward pictographic systems, like English was turning more into Chinese. Not that there was anything wrong, or he believed there was anything wrong with a pictographic system, but he believed that it was going to create more confusion the more the more we went in that direction because we're based on the alphabet. So take a word like squirrel. When you and I see that word on the page, because we know it, we clock it pictographically. We look at that word and we see it as a picture. We don't see it as a a sequence of letters. Because if we did, we would probably pronounce it like these French people that you're talking about. We would probably pronounce it in the phonetic sequence of those letters, which would not be how we say it. So we see a word like that, or we see a word like laugh, which is not, it's not written phonetically, and we just know automatically that it's pronounced a certain way. So the word laugh with those 5 letters, we see it as a picture, not as a sequence of letters. And Benjamin Franklin was worried about that. So to to salvage English before it went too far in that direction, he came up with his system of spelling. So that a pictographic system can work for a group of people that for centuries have been using it, but for an alphabetic system, it really is it's a de-evolution rather than an evolution.
Laugh is a good one because it kind of goes along with enough. But why? I mean, well, first of all, everybody who wanted to do a new one, at least most of them, were really smart. They're too smart for their own good. It was like, obviously, this sucks. And Benjamin Franklin and Mark Twain, these guys were the smartest guys around. And C.S. Lewis, for God's sakes. But like laugh, okay, you and I both know it should be Laff. So why didn't we just, who's stopping us from doing that? I mean, kids do it, but
Right. Well, you hit on the point is that no one is stopping kids from doing it. No one is stopping anyone from doing it informally. So I think that the more a word like laugh, LAF or double F, becomes part of our informal, unconscious culture, I think it eventually over time that'll become more formalized. So other words like OMG or LOL, these are words that are now in Webster's dictionary. They're in the Oxford English Dictionary. They are still probably considered slangish, but they're in a formal, authoritative book about it. I think it's only a matter of time before our informal way of spelling things like laugh becomes formal. But we're talking centuries, like a real long timeline. Um, but before the internet, which democratized language, before the internet, there was an immutably right and wrong way of writing something. So if you wrote laugh, LAF, you would immediately be reprimanded by a parent or a teacher, and then you would know not to do it. But now that kind of informal shorthanding is roams wild. And the people that are using it now at 12 years old, in 10 years, those will be the journalists and the editors and the publishers who bring that into the formalized world.
yeah, it's like every CEO in 10 years will have tattoos.
Yeah, yeah, that's true.
Like it's like, okay, yes, I think the process is evolutionary, the process is organic. But one of the things you said about, violent responses, who was that guy that was like so violent? Like if he was teaching, he would like throw the chalk or the eraser at someone. He was so upset. There's a really violent guy. I forgot
He was
who.
this man, well, he was a teacher in England in the, I want to say 1600s, and he was so violently aggressive about being a grammar cop that that he would reprimand students by whipping them, throwing things at them. One of his students was John Milton, the author. We don't know if John was ever subject to one of these whipping fits, but his teacher sure was given to it.
Yeah, you can make some assumptions. You can assume that the new pope had a cheesesteak at Pat's in Philadelphia.
Oh boy, I'm not even going to touch that third rail.
The other thing is that, okay, that guy was violent because people were violating what he felt was sacrosanct. And the other side were the people that made fun of guys who did the new languages. They laughed at him. Samuel Johnson said horrible things about Americanisms.
Mhm.
That's the other side of the coin, that anyone who tried to do this was immediately lampooned and kind of humiliated into stopping.
I mean, let's it's very human to make fun of something that's new. Now, something that's new that also looks inherently silly, like TUF for tough or laugh, or THO for though, because of that inherent absurdity of looking at that on the paper and seeing it aesthetically as a very absurd thing because it looks like a child wrote it, that just lent itself to ridicule and mockery. It was too easy. You didn't need a violent reaction to it. You didn't need to be whipped to to tamp down this movement of simplified spelling. All you needed was a really witty newspaper headline, and then people would never look at simplified spelling the same way again. And it was really the thing that brought down this movement over the centuries was mockery. It's just and you know, you mentioned the cover and how enticing it is to look at. That's part of it because you have to do a double take when you look at these increasingly absurd versions of the word enough. It draws your attention, and then there's a little bit of a funny, you know, your funny bone starts tingling.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's again another reason why, because at the end when you get to the bottom and you see ENUF, you go, yeah, that's right. You know, you
Yeah,
idiot, it's not
it's
right.
right in the heart, but in the mind still relies on the dictionary, and so you know, it's we're still spelling enough with way too many letters.
I think the one guy, the hero of the book in my mind, is Noah Webster, because he didn't really give up and he spent all his money, an enormous amount back then,
Yeah.
trying to get trying to become someone who is actually going to be accepted. And then, you know, and then you have Webster's dictionary. So he accomplished an enormous amount. And in the dictionary, he slid in these things,
Mhm.
did change
Yeah.
elements,
I
right?
mean, he is the authority today of American English, but very few people know that 30 years before his first Webster's Dictionary, he was really into this radical phonetic simplification of spelling. And he was the person who proposed words like laugh, LAF, and though, THO. He spelled words like daughter as DAWTER. I mean, he was really into, and again, he was laughed out of laughed out of this elite early American republic because of these simplifications, but he didn't give up on this idea entirely. So when he's putting together Webster's Dictionary a couple decades later, he's able to sneak in some of these moderate, um, more moderate simplified spellings, words like honor and color without the U, or theater and center ending ER rather than RE, or the word plow, which in America we spell as PLOW, but in England they still spell as PLOUGH. So he was able to do this, and once his dictionary became widely used and it was in every school and in every library, it gave these simplifications legitimacy, and they just became part of American English as we know it today.
Yeah. And the people who tried to introduce numeric changes, whether it was 2 or 4, they were laughed at too. But now we can't really talk about the book without talking about Prince and Sly and rappers. It's so funny about what I was saying about the book extending beyond the pages. This last night, I was listening with my wife to "Thank You for Letting Me Be Myself Again." I was really how much I went to a Sly and the Family Stone concert in 1972, and it cost $6.50. And I thought, who the hell would pay $6.50 for a concert ticket? That's how old I am.
Uh, and if any listeners at home haven't heard that song or seen the way it's spelled, thank you for letting me be myself again. It's 1970 or 1971. Go home and look that up because it's a real ideal, perfect example of creative spelling that became popular in the 60s and the 70s, really kind of peaked in the 80s, but continues today where bands they were trying to misspell their band names or misspell their song titles as a way to stand out from a crowd, or maybe as a way to appeal to a younger audience because there's something fun and playful about a misspelling. So the Beatles are spelled with an A. Um, the Monkees spelled EES without the Y, and the Birds are spelled with a Y. And all throughout the 60s and the 70s, you see it kind of ramping up. Prince in the 80s really embodies the whole drive to simplify his spellings. All his song titles, or many of them, use standalone letters like U for the word you, or the number four in place of the word for. So that has precedent back in the 1800s. People, it wasn't invented by these pop culture influencers, but it really was harvested by them into the best for the most commercial value.
Yeah, and then some of the things are just basically humor or designed to attract, like the umlauts over Blue Oyster Cult
Yeah. Motley
or
Crue.
yeah, Motley Crue. Or if you take it to extremes and you even talk about how this worked, which I didn't know, it's Prince. You could either say the artist formerly known as, or you could ask someone to send you the symbol.
I mean, here was a man who lived, he embodied simplification so much that he changed his name to a symbol. That's about as simplified as you can get. You change your name not to a phonetic version of Prince, but a singular a singular symbol. I mean, he went the pictographic route way more than the phonetically alphabetic route that someone like Sly took.
Yeah, and that's where I really thought, how could these guys have thought that this is going to be accepted? Like the Mormon alphabet, or the idea of creating these symbols that weren't letters and expecting someone to accept them, even though they had no familiarity, they had no context. And like I said, these guys were not dumb. They were really smart. Why did they think they were going to be successful? Like
That's the
Benjamin Franklin.
interesting,
Yeah, Benjamin Franklin, for example.
that's the real interesting tension and conflict I see in this is that it's a history of failures, but not perpetrated by dumb people. It's really the opposite. It's some of the most brilliant intellectuals of any given era. So, um, Mark Twain, he was a man who came out of newspaper world. He was an author. He was the most prominent, probably the most well-paid author of the early 1900s. And he lends his voice and his support to the simplified spelling movement. He joins the simplified spelling board. He speaks at journalistic conferences in 1906, trying to convince the Associated Press to convert to simplified spelling. And he eventually gives up on that. I mean, he eventually sees that this is not practical, that it won't ever pass. I think after he meets the initial resistance, he sees that it's not going to pass, and he eventually abandons his hopes for simplified spelling. But the core is really there. He knows from the moment he starts getting paid as a writer, he knows that the English language is filled with a lot of nonsense letters. And he was a man like Benjamin Franklin who was always trying to find the most efficient, practical, scientific route from point A to point B. And if point A is the author and point B is the reader, then why would you waste extra pages and extra ink filling your words with unnecessary letters?
Yeah, like you could save one page out of 15, which
Yeah.
makes sense. Or like you say, you do a litany where he goes, well, he did this because he didn't want to, Benjamin Franklin didn't want to be late. So he just translated it into his own lifestyle and thought, well, obviously everyone else thinks early to bed, early to rise, but no one else really does think that.
Yeah.
The way that Mark Twain got around it and was the language that Huckleberry Finn used, like when talking about Aunt
Mhm.
Polly. He stuck it in there, and the thing was, people read it and they understood it. So that was when I thought that would be a turning point, because you could read what Huckleberry Finn said, and even though you were just starting the book from the first time, you could understand it completely.
Right. Dialect writing had already been popular. The idea of a character in a book is speaking in such a low class or hot or strong accented way that you have to spell their words differently. Charles Dickens did this a lot. But what Twain did, which he was one of the originators, is that he wrote an entire book from the point of view of one of these low class characters, Huckleberry Finn, who couldn't spell very well. And so he was taking this informal dialect voice, which is usually reserved for just dialogue within a chapter, and he made it the actual narrator voice. And he was kind of grouped into this group of writers in the 1870s, 1880s called the Funny Fellows, who were these American humorists who took simplified spelling and turned it into a humorous form of literature and wrote a lot of books and essays from the point of view of these deliberately misspelling characters. So there were people like, in addition to Twain, Josh Billings and um, Petroleum Nasby, which was a pen name, of course. But these were people who, for decades, they made a name for themselves in the literary world by writing from the point of view of a low-class character who really can't spell. So all of their words and sentences were necessarily spelled in this phonetic way. And they kind of came about as this way to mock the movement once again. Um, yeah, the Funny Fellows. The Funny Fellows spelled PH funny and PH fellows.
Yeah, the other one who did it. Yeah, and I remember as a kid reading stuff by them, and also reading even when you listen to Will Rogers, he did it on purpose to make
Hmm
him sound down so that he could say profound things.
hmm That speaks again to the idea that simplified spelling is only low class. It's only for children or people who are illiterate. So the idea of only making it the dialect of Huckleberry Finn, who's dirt poor and has no education, it kind of just contributed to this idea that the only people that simplified spelling is good for are uneducated people.
Well, and the other side of the ocean, because we're talking about America now, is going back to Great Britain. You go to Eliza Doolittle, and that was the
Hmm
paragraph you put in there that I really couldn't decipher, but I could hear. I
hmm
You can always hear, you can hear Eliza Doolittle speaking. Doesn't necessarily mean you can understand it, but you hear the music of it.
hmm Yeah, this is everyone knows Eliza Doolittle from My Fair Lady, Pygmalion. George Bernard Shaw, the author of Pygmalion, was a prominent simplified speller in the basically between the year 1900 and when he died in around 1950. And he bequeathed a, huge portion of his estate to the founding of a new simplified alphabet. And he earmarked this money, I think it was a third of his will, to James Pittman, who's the grandson of Isaac Pittman and also a spelling reformer. And he bequeathed this money to putting it towards creating and sustaining and standardizing a new simplified alphabet. Lasted a few years, never caught on. That's kind of the typical trajectory all these take.
The other thing is we've spoken a couple of times about the difference. Well, we didn't talk about color and color or humor and humor, but Samuel Johnson, you do talk about a lot. And it's not only that he hated Americanisms, he just hated Americans.
Yeah, once you dig into the these the resistance to different languages or the resistance to different spellings, once you dig a little bit past the surface, you realize it's just a straight up prejudice against the country itself. So Samuel Johnson didn't like the Americanisms that were becoming part of English in the colonial world, in America, that were being fed into it by new slangs and also American Indian words. And he railed against this language, but really deep down, he obsessively hated Americans. He just believed that they were some satellite version of England that really just didn't understand the history and the culture of it. And he was right. I mean, not right to hate them, but right that it was more than just an island of England. It was its own island. It was its own country.
I mean, you just realize something is that, like, just as with the revolution, maybe people just don't like rebellion. And that's what
Mm.
this is, rebellion.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's at the core of it. Will resist a lot of things, a lot of political things, especially anything that's trying to change the status quo, anything that's trying to change it overnight, anything that's trying to, from a position of authority, tell everyone else how to live. So it's so much, the status quo might be difficult for people. Politically, it might be a terrible time and place to live. But when posed with the idea of a full rebellion in which starting tomorrow, the entire culture, your entire world will be flipped upside down, I think a lot of people would rather the status quo because at least it might be terrible, but at least it's the terror that they know rather than the one they don't know. People would rather keep with the messy orthography of English than change it overnight.
Right. More people would rather stay in England than to sail to America and end up in North Dakota or something. I would be one of the ones who stayed.
Yeah, I mean, if North Dakota is your destination, yeah.
Yeah, so it's not only rebellion, it's, as you were saying, change. I mean, in our company, I remember when we wanted to change our accounting system, and it was like pulling teeth. I mean, these people were used to it was computerized, but it was a new program and you'd have to migrate everything. And our chief accountant just quit. She wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
And even though it was a better system and they knew it would be a better system, they still were dragged kicking and screaming into it.
Yeah, again, it's the messy system they know versus the better system that is unfamiliar to them. The status quo is attractive to people, even if they whine about it, even if they complain about it or trip over it all the time. It's still preferable in a lot of circumstances.
Well, if you set aside the idea that it takes kids in America longer to learn the language than in other countries, really, since we all do it and we all don't, well, except for kids today, since we all accept it in my generation and your generation, it's like, okay, other people have trouble with it around the world, but it is a language that's used for finance, for all commerce in the world, for literature to a certain extent. So what's the difference really? Why not just let it be? Or maybe you think that's right. We should let it be.
I'm caught in the middle. I don't know how you feel, but okay, the way I think of it is I think spelling should be simpler, but I don't think that we should simplify it because I don't think that's how language really changes. I don't think you can really push our language into the future in this artificial way, just like I don't think it's practical to try to pull our language back into the past. It's going to evolve the way it's supposed to evolve. It has its own mind, and I don't think it's on us or one institution or one person to try to force it in one direction. It's like a river flowing. You really can't change the direction of that river, of that water flow. You just have to see where it's going to go.
I'm in the middle too, but I do think, like when you use Jack Dorsey's first tweet, this is a word I despise because it's just a disgusting word. You're not tweeting anything. It has nothing to do with anything, and you're not a bird. But but like because of text and because of to and for and you, like my stepdaughter again someone can say a long paragraph and she just says fire or a fact or real, and it conveys an enormous amount of, actually it's so advanced that sometimes a lack of response completely means something. So
Yeah. The absence of language is kind of a form of language. That's interesting. Um, but yeah, an emoji conveys quite a lot. If you're growing up in that world of concentrated text speak, it means it means a lot. I mean, a picture is worth 1,000 words, but sometimes an emoji can tell a whole story.
well, so that's really funny because I mean, I always tried to keep ahead of the wave because I thought I was cool doing that, especially since I'm 73. But obviously, I haven't kept ahead of the wave at all. It's engulfed me. But I do know a couple of things. So, like when my wife's mother, who's 82, and she sent an emoji of an eggplant, it was really hard to explain to her that
No.
because it's just an eggplant. Why should it be something other than that? But it is.
There's so many, so many pitfalls.
There's a dictionary of those now too.
There has to be because the sheer embarrassment you might cause yourself or someone else by sending the wrong emoji. Boy, imagine sending that to a coworker and not knowing. It could be tough.
Could be sexual harassment.
Yeah. Or it could be an offer to just have an eggplant parmesan.
Right. That's what she meant.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like my daughter Annie, like she was mad at someone, so she said, I don't know, but that's because you send a series, which becomes a sentence.
Hmm.
You send a skull and a hole and a fire, meaning you're going to kill them, you're going to bury them, and they're going to go to hell. Just fine. I mean, I guess it's fine. But like my nephew said, I understand it. Isn't that what it's all about? Comprehension?
It is, I believe. And that's what these reformers are trying to fight against. It's the lack of comprehension that our current system has. And new forms of spelling, text speak, simplified spelling, many people will see this as some kind of loss of tradition or the downfall of English. But other people will see it as just the natural evolution that spelling will continue to find the shortest route from one point to another, just like spoken communication does. If I said something in slang to you like sup, I think we would both know that I'm trying to say what is up, but I'm using three letters to condense three words. And spoken language happens on more unconsciously because we're just saying it. But I think the same thing happens with spelling on a longer timeline. And I mean, I tend to see that I tend to fall more into that camp that evolution is slow and it looks messy up close, like an impressionist painting. It looks like little globs of paint and uh it's muddy, but you pull away and you give it enough time and you see it from a broader point of view, the point of view of a historian in 500 years, and you see a shape forming.
Yeah. One of the things that really got to me at the end was when you talk about the derivation of okay, whether it's all correct or whatever it is. And then I realized we've shortened okay to K.
Right. And you can shorten it even more by putting a period at the end. You can say a lot by writing K with a period at the end. You could lose a whole friendship over that.
Yeah. If you don't put an exclamation, I hate putting exclamation points, but if I say thanks without one, I'm insulting them. And I'm
Oh, God forbid, Sam. I mean, I'm offended just hearing you say it.
Yeah, if you send me an email afterwards saying I enjoyed our interview and don't put an exclamation point, that means to me you did not enjoy it at all.
No, I'll lose weeks of sleep over that.
I know, and I'm forced into agreeing. I mean, I'm forced into it there. That's a different. We haven't talked about
Yeah.
being forced into it.
Hmm.
Okay, anyway, we could go on forever. But one of the things I wanted to talk to conclude with was the fact that your books all do something another thing that I think is cool. Not that I want to keep complimenting you, but I want people to buy the book. Um, but that your books, since they combine laughter and fact and learning, I always thought that if there's laughter, it really makes you turn the page. Because if it's funny, I'm going to turn the page to see if there's something else funny. And
Hmm.
that's the way you write everything.
That's the way I mean, I write books the way I would want as a reader to read them. And
Right.
I always am drawn to humorists and people who have just a witty, clever tone about them. My favorite author is this old New Yorker writer, James Thurber,
Oh yeah.
who wrote short stories and essays and was a cartoonist. And since I was 10 years old, he's always been my favorite because he had this understated humor about it was almost he was almost a Larry David kind of self-deprecating. He was annoyed by the tiny things in life, the way people said something at dinner, or and that's just the point of view I have. So I write the books that I would want to read. And that's all I'm thinking about when I do it. I'm hoping that I share that interest in humor that other people would share and that it would reach a broad audience. But I'm really not writing for anyone other than myself, which sounds like a myopic way to write, but I'm trying to make myself laugh a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's well, remember I'm just trying to look something up, but remember the Curb Your Enthusiasm where he has a girlfriend and instead of laughing, she says LOL.
Of course I remember that. Of course. I probably should have included a little quote in my book from that. You can't, yeah.
That's an
LOL.
that's interesting because you can do it in text, it's fine. But if you translate it from text into conversation, it's incredibly irritating.
Barry. For whatever generation. I mean, it's probably most cringe cringy to the younger generation, the ones who really feel like they get the slang of texting. Oh man, it's social suicide.
Yeah, I know. It's amazing. There's so many pitfalls, like which I have done. At one point, I even though when I got my second divorce and I started dating, well, and I had two girlfriends named Amy, the idea of, and I sent the text to, I should have put Amy 1 and Amy 2 in the contacts. So, yeah.
A lot of pitfalls.
You can destroy your life that way.
Very easily.
It's funny because James Thurber wrote The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which was one of my favorites, and it contains that same kind of humor.
Yeah.
Well, okay, like I said, we could keep going because I have tons of questions and it's fun just talking to someone whose book I liked. But the good thing is, since I do have a bookstore, I can come out from behind the counter and grab it. My daughter, when she works at the bookstore, she grabs a book and she tells someone, "You have to buy this." And she's so mean and straightforward that they do buy it.
She's good to have on staff.
I know.
I should hire her. I should hire her to walk around with me.
You can have her for a while. She's good to be on staff, but not that great to be around.
Oh boy. Well, I hope she doesn't watch this interview.
No, she will. She knows. She says she gets it from me. I adopted her from China, but she says she got it from me because of genetics.
Yeah.
And anyway, this was great. The book was great. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thanks so much for doing this.
Thanks so much, Sam. It was great.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of The Avid Reader. If you liked today's episode, check out more of our content on our channel.